guess I'd pull it right back and make it about character.
Hi everyone, it's Peter Shrubmade from beforetheweekend.com podcast. I had to think about it for a second then. I'm missing my wing woman, Casey McDonald. She's not joining me down here in Melbourne. And oddly enough, I have next to an REIV pillow, I'm sitting next to the CEO of the REIQ. That's a lot of REIs.
REIV?
Yeah, here we go. Antonia, Mercorella, CEO of the REIQ, who joined us in episode 1. And we thought we'd have a bit of a chat today. We're 1 week away from the federal budget, which was released. Last week you were on the show talking about call for calm, don't hand out investment advice. There were quite a few things that we covered off last week, but I think like when we were talking off air before, you were mentioning that like a lot of the focus has been on federal budget, but probably not on the larger issue at hand. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I guess what we've been talking about is the focus of the budget, which is, of course, improving home ownership rates for first-time buyers. And so I guess what we've been talking about is, and the thing that I think is universally agreed, whether you love the budget or hate the budget, I think there's universal agreement that creating those pathways to home ownership for first home buyers is incredibly important. I think it's a conversation that most of us as parents or even grandparents are having at the moment, the concern about this entire generation who are feeling locked out of home ownership. So I think that's important.
And I mean, I suppose you and I are both in the scenario where we have offspring that are looking to purchase. And, so it's not just in our space. One of the things I was most disappointed about in the federal budget is the wedge that it tended to drive between our generation and the one underneath us, or the two underneath us, if you really want to look at that. Because I think our generation are actually invested in seeing the younger generation enter the property market. I don't think there's, certainly not from you and I know we're in the industry, but even the people I talk to who may not have a house at the moment, or who is our age, they are incredibly concerned about how younger people enter the home ownership. So, I mean, on that basis, is it just a supply and demand issue?
So I think what I'm disappointed about, I think the point you make is a good one. It's created this us and them mentality, which shouldn't be what it's about.
But we've seen that before. We've seen that before, landlord versus tenant.
Yeah.
We've seen successive governments use a wedge to try and get a political opinion across.
Well, I think, as I've said many, many times, I think the critical issue is supply. But one of the things that I'd like to talk about that you and I were talking about off air is how do we actually help people build the confidence again so that they actually know what that pathway to home ownership looks like.
Yep.
So for me, I talk a lot about the fact that we should be teaching kids about financial literacy and how to save from a much, much younger age.
Yep.
It's not something that we do at school. And I think our kids are probably more likely through the process of osmosis because of what we do. We're talking about housing all the time. My kids have learned a lot through me and through their father. But I think schools have a role to play. And I've been amazed at the number of really well-educated people who don't necessarily understand what's involved. So what do I mean by that? How do you go about saving? Do most young people understand that they need a 20% deposit to avoid lender's mortgage insurance? Most people, I know that I talk to lots of young people who say, what is LMI? I didn't know I needed a 20% deposit. I don't think even people necessarily understand what stamp duty is and how significant stamp duty can be and where those thresholds are so that you can avoid stamp duty.
LVR, loan to value ratio, they don't understand not just LMI, they don't understand serviceability is another issue.
Yeah. And I think even just those sorts of things that if you've been gifted a bunch of money, that doesn't necessarily mean that a bank's going to want to lend to you. They want to see evidence usually of your ability to save. And then, so there's your ability to save as well as the serviceability requirements. So these are conversations that I don't think are being necessarily had.
Should we go to a bank?
Well, I think, yeah.
even that's a difficult one, because every young person I've ever thrown at a bank has had a lot of trouble getting a loan, even if they're seasoned lenders or their parents have banked at the ANZ for all of their years or whatever it may be.
And I think banks make an assumption. They use a lot of language that I think can be quite intimidating and isn't necessarily understood. So I think as a starting point, those are things we should be teaching our kids at a much younger age. Learning how to save, whether it's for the purposes of home ownership or for something else. I think that's really important. The other thing that we've been talking about, Pete, is I think it can be incredibly challenging for people to buy if they're single. There's a lot of evidence that shows us very clearly that if you are in whether you're a couple or you're buying with someone else, clearly that's going to make life easier for you. It increases your options. You can obviously look at something in a higher price bracket. And if you're trying to service a mortgage together, that's going to be far easier. Now, that not everyone is in a couple, but I think one of the other things that we're starting to see emerge that I'm a fan of is buying with either another family member or with a friend. I think that can really help to accelerate your chances to enter the market. But when you're doing that, making sure you've got that legal agreement set up in the background for that is incredibly important.
Yeah. And so, I mean, are you aware, how does one do that? Do they go and just see a legal practitioner? Because I wouldn't imagine it's something that a regular conveyancer would do.
You definitely want to go see a lawyer, and you want to think about, how are we buying this property? Are we buying it as tenants in common or as joint tenants? What happens if one of us wants to sell, for instance? What happens if one of us doesn't meet the requirements under the loan? Who's responsible for maintenance and repairs? What if one party wants to sell and the other one doesn't? So all of those what if scenarios are really, really important. And the thing about buying with someone else is it might be that it's a shorter term plan for both of you. So you might decide, well, we don't want to live together forever, but here's an opportunity for us to build some equity in the property, and then we might have a departure date when we both decide to sell, or when one of us decides to sell. What does the model look like for how are we going to get it valued and who pays for what? So it's all of those things which absolutely you should talk to a lawyer about. And it doesn't have to cost, it doesn't have to be, it's a fairly standard agreement. Obviously you might have some different provisions you want to insert, but as a general rule, it's quite a templated process. So, and money really well spent.
Another thing I see a lot of is causing a lot of difficulty, especially for first home owners getting into the market, is an assumption that they need to buy where they work, or they need to buy in the area that they like.
Yeah.
There seems to be, and like, I don't want to come across as condescending. Back in the day, we had our lender call us and say, if you had one less cup of coffee a day, you'd be able to do better at this or whatever, with regards to the amount of money that we were saving. And I found that incredibly condescending.
Yeah.
But
it's a bit like the avo and toast thing.
Yeah,
if you ate less avo and toast, you'd be right.
as a great example, when one of the first dwellings we bought a block of land first, which was a different way of going, my wife and I. But one of the first houses we bought on the Gold Coast, because the housing market there was incredibly affordable at the time, even though I was working in Brisbane. And for me, that was a torturous 2 years of commuting backwards and forwards, and the hours that would take.
Yeah.
But was that the better idea with regards to getting into the market? And I definitely think it was.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think what we're seeing a lot more of now is people understanding that they might not be able to afford to buy in their preferred suburb. They might not be able to afford the type of dwelling they want.
The asset type,
Rentvesting can be a really great option. So we're seeing more and more people doing this. So rent close to where you work, or in that cool suburb you'd like to be in, or in the type of dwelling and the type of area you want to be living in. And maybe it's then we will buy, but we'll actually buy in an area that isn't somewhere we can practically live or want to live. So again, I just think we need to be having conversations about how can we help people get onto get that first ladder, that first step onto the property ladder.
Getting an understanding of the market cycles is also really important. And these days, with generative AI being, so prevalent, there is enough data out there where you could be looking at suburbs and understanding that, what is a 4-bedroom or a 5-bedroom house in a Melbourne, in a Sydney, in a Brisbane, might cost 6 to 7 million. That same house, on the fringes or on the very edge is not going to be worth anywhere near that. Or sometimes, like looking at Melbourne at the moment, the asset type that's really on the nose here in Victoria are the units in the city, where there are some going between 500,000 and 700,000.
Ridiculously good buying.
That would be that would be the way to go.
And I think that's a great point. There's so much data available now. Much more data than there was when I was in my 20s. And
myself,
just freely available. And as you say, the ability to analyse that data has become so much easier as well.
Do you think I saw an article today where they're talking about, it was an economist saying that housing prices are coming down. I'm not sure I buy that. I can't see a reason as to why that would be occurring when we're still in a deficit of about 500,000 houses.
I think this is really interesting. Obviously, we've just seen the federal budget announcement. We're in the middle of a lot of global uncertainty. We've got a cost of living crisis. All of that stuff is going to create dent confidence. So I think we're starting to see that play out. But again, we have to be careful about this. But when I think about Queensland, where we live, Pete, difficult to see how that could be a long-term scenario when we've still got such extraordinarily high demand and very insufficient supply.
We've spoken about a lot of factors here. Do you see any new forms of technology hitting the market that might help first home buyers or people who are not in dwellings actually look to home ownership?
I actually think the answer is there are some good tools out there, but they're probably not doing anything extraordinary other than really just educating you. So again, there's lots of data out there that gives you great information. I can jump on and do a lot of research. It's all available at my fingertips. You can work out what's available to you as a first home buyer, where you can avoid stamp duty in your local jurisdiction potentially, can also really easily research what sort of federal incentives are out there. So it's not necessarily earth-shattering technology per se, but rather that you can now, I guess, find lots of digital tools and information really easily to get the answers to the questions that you need.
Yeah, there is one that I've seen. So if you're watching this, there's an app out there called Scale App, and the guy behind it, Nick Melrose, created it when his sister was unable to get into the housing market, and it's got excellent an excellent background to put you in a fiscal status where you're able to purchase. So I'd have a look at that. That's scale.app. I'd go and have a look at that.
Nice call out. Sorry, Nick. That is a great one.
No, you're right.
In fact, he won the pitch battle a couple of years ago.
He won the pitch battle, which you were a judge on. Oh, this is awkward.
Sorry, Nick. It's been a long day.
No, that's okay. And on that, everyone's just broken for lunch. Yeah. So we might call it quits here, but do you have any final word that you'd like to say to somebody looking to get into the market?
Look, my final word on it is I get it. I have a 22 and an 18-year-old who's about to turn 19 in a few weeks. So I understand the sentiment. I understand that you're feeling like there's no pathway. But I would say don't lose confidence. Talk to people who can help you, give you information, and you might have to start small and then build your way up. So don't lose confidence.
Antonia Mercorella, CEO of the REIQ, thank you so much for joining us on Before the Weekend. It's great to see you again.
Thanks, Pete. Happy weekend, everyone.
Ciao.
Before the weekend.